Welcome back, everyone. The bad news about the short break is that we have to end our break and cut back some of our conversations compared to what we've become used to over this week. So let's take our seats. And I promise, if you want to stay after we're done, you're welcome to. We have these beautiful facilities and the beautiful atrium to discuss together as long as we want to follow this up. So perhaps at this point, I need not mention that I'm Liz Holm. Let's see, do I have a clicker, Justin? This is the first time I get to control the slides. Oh, look at that. I'm Liz Holm, the Summit Organizing Chair, and one of the experiments we decided to try, and my level of sleep last night may declare whether it was successful or not, was for the organizer to, having flitted from session to session and taking notes, put together an overview of what's happened over these past 2 days. So I've attempted to do that late last night. We'll see how many typos you can find. And hopefully this will help you put things together in your mind as it did to me. And I look forward to your feedback as well as we have a dialogue about the outcomes and the views and your experiences with this summit, which will be led by Wayne Jones immediately following my little presentation. I wanted to start just by giving you some information about things that surprised me about the summit attendance itself. We had almost 120 people here, which was great. They were 120 people who really wanted to be here because I know all of you had to go through hoops to explain why you were going to a conference that wasn't like any other conference. And I appreciate your doing that, and it meant that everyone in the room was here because they wanted to be and were engaged and were active, and I appreciate that very much. So please, let's give ourselves a quick round of applause for that. I was surprised at the industry turnout here at the summit. It's hard to travel when you're from industry. It's hard for all of us, but it's especially hard to justify travel when profit's on the line. And we had excellent industry turnout, much more than we thought, and we're very gratified to know that this is a topic of such concern and such attention. We also had, for me, considerably more turnout from the women and men that I would like to refer to as in leadership or eminent positions. I won't refer to hair color or demographic group, but from the more senior members of our profession. This was also very gratifying. I expected to see a lot of young people and did, but the leaders and the senior members of our profession turned out as well in great numbers and had very lively discussions. And I think we're going to talk about the final question we had to Dr. Dresselhaus about how we can work together, senior and junior members of our profession, to help in this area. So with that said, I wanted to start with some quotes, because I took down some verbatim quotes, almost none of which am I going to attribute to anyone for a couple reasons. First of all, I didn't always know who said them, and I couldn't interrupt the stream of talk to find out. Second of all, I certainly didn't get permission from anyone to quote them. So I'm going to give the quotes without attribution, and if you recognize yourself, there you are. This is the comment I overheard on Tuesday morning that told me I wasn't in Kansas anymore. This is a different conference. I switched purses, so that's why I'm so disorganized. I've never heard that at a conference before, and I thought, I'm somewhere that I can be comfortable, because I have always said my purse, having a purse is like having, a boyfriend or girlfriend, a relationship. It takes a while to get used to them, and you don't know if they're going to work out at first. So that was that quote. Other notable quotes for me were, if you're in a position of management, make it happen, make the change. And we came back to this one over and over, the idea that sometimes you just do it. You get the parking places for pregnant women. You get the lactation room. You just do it. And that came up over and over, and this was actually a quote, as you might recall, from one of the first keynotes. This one I loved. I'm tired of carrots, it's time for sticks. This was from a leader in our field who feels that perhaps it's time to stop asking nicely. to make diversity goals, but instead make it a metric upon which your compensation is based. We have a responsibility to move things forward, meaning all of us. We don't have a responsibility to wait around for leadership to do it, for NSF to do it, for the government to do it. It's all of us. This one I liked from an industry person in the industry session. It's encouraging to see operational ideas coming out of academia. She went on to express that she'd never seen a good management idea come out of academia before. But I believe it was in reference to some of the recruiting practices that NSF has been so helpful in advancing. This is from the board at the early career breakout. If you want to be a general, dress like a general. You know who you are who said that. I love that quote. Come into the room and make them look. And finally, and this I think could be a motto for many of us striving for work-life balance, we have a right to have hobbies. It is okay to do something outside of this workplace, and that's, in a very microcosm way, that's what we're striving for in work-life balance, is that we can have hobbies. There's one more I wanted to give you because there's got to be a story behind this. I don't know who wrote it, but I love it. This was in the question about dress in the workplace in the early career session. It says, I noticed that everyone wears sweater vests at my work. I've joined in my own way. So my first thought was, do they work at Hogwarts? And then my second thought is, okay, sweater vest, I can visualize this. You know, I'm from the Midwest, you know. What does joining in my own way mean? I found this picture on the internet. So that's what I'm hoping is the look. So if you are the sweater vest person, come to me afterwards, tell me what's going on with that. And finally, the quote that I think we all agree, I think I've heard this quote over and over again throughout the summit, the best mission statement we could have, and I do accredit, of course, to Johnny DeLoach, one of our keynote speakers. Leaders shouldn't just send the choir, they should be the choir. All of us, we are the choir. We're going to go home and recruit more people for this choir. It's time for us all to join the choir. So past the quotes, I want to give a quick recap of how I saw the sessions over the past couple days. And we began with data. That was Mary Galvin's talk from NSF, because NSF certainly has the best, longest data set on STEM diversity. And the data were in some ways disheartening. There's no question that there's still a problem, because the population of people in STEM disciplines, of employees in STEM disciplines, the students in STEM disciplines, doesn't resemble the US population. And that means we're missing people that we could be including. But the data also shows very strongly that it is improving for women. And I think Dr. Dresselhaus's presentation really emphasized that. From 2 to 20%, that's an order of magnitude improvement. And the NSF data show it as well. But the key challenges I took right at the beginning in our opening plenary were twofold. First of all, how can we leverage the advances made by women to include the other underrepresented minorities in our field, because they have not kept up. The blacks, African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans have not shown the same improvement over the same years. So this is one key question. And the other is, how do we adjust our tactics, our goals, our metrics, everything we think about diversity and inclusion as we achieve success? So for a long time, our dialogue has been how to get women in the pipeline, how to get underrepresented minorities in the pipeline. That's still important. But we're starting to succeed. We're reaching levels where we have 20, 25% women in the junior faculty ranks. We do different things now. Now we need to go to the next step and adjust to that new reality and make sure that the workplace remains as welcoming as the pipeline, as we made the pipeline. We then went on to keynotes from each of our 3 sectors, and I think these talks really crystallized the themes. You'll agree if you saw them that those 3 talks couldn't have been more different in terms of style, but they had 4 themes to me in common that every single one of them brought up, which were, first of all, that leaders at the highest levels have to create the culture, but even more so have to directly take actions themselves, not assign it, not delegate it, not talk about it. So in business parlance, and I always hate this term, you do have to walk the walk and talk the talk both. And that was a theme of all 3 of our keynotes. Mindful recruiting, that is attentive recruiting to diversity issues, is essential in all the sectors. We can't expect diversity to come naturally. We can't declare victory. We need to have policies, we need to have training, and we need to have support structures at all levels, and we need to keep them there and keep them vibrant. And finally, we're moving past a numbers game, as I think Johnny DeLoach said specifically, to an inclusive workplace. So we're moving past the check the boxes, I have the right numbers of each of these groups, to I have an inclusive, diverse, vibrant workplace. And I think that set the stage wonderfully for the breakouts that we then had. For me, at least, I went to all 3 sector breakouts and saw surprises in each of the places. In the industry breakout, there was a huge spectrum of diversity efforts in industry, from the very successful to the non-existent. There was a surprising lack of data. Industry is allowed to demand data from its employees, and yet doesn't do so with the vigor that NSF seeks data from people it's not allowed to ask for data, or to insist upon data from. There was also in industry a lot of disseminating of success stories and failures, lessons learned, as we say, to not make them sound too failure-oriented. I think that in the industry room, there were a lot of people who don't ever get to talk to each other. We academicians, we get together for various reasons and talk, including diversity reasons. But in industry, it's very hard to get together with your competitors or even people outside your industry entirely and talk about diversity. And so that was happening in a very vigorous and exciting way throughout the industry sector day. The opportunities to share best practices, especially focused on including diversity in the strategic plan, that is starting from the top and everything else percolates down, using diversity as performance metric, and the very strong value I kept hearing again and again of employee resource groups, making sure that your employees all feel members of communities within the company. In academia, there was a lot of talk about how hard it is to do top-down change. So how do we change from the bottom up? How do we engage the faculty in order to change things at the deans and presidents level? The work-life balance and the dual career issue continues to be very challenging in academia, and that remained a topic of discussion. The best practices included, to me at least, seeing the very strong impact of the NSF advanced programs. They've created an impressive array of resources. Most of the schools who had an advanced grant institutionalized the program on their own dime afterwards. Getting those resources out to the schools who didn't have advanced grants is a challenge. Bridge programs were talked about in great detail, and there's some wonderful successes, including Viola's, of course, showing great promises for bringing underrepresented minority students prepared and ready for entering engineering schools. And the other theme was we've got to train the untrainables, the tenured faculty. Mentoring is so important, guidance is so important, inclusion is so important, and we have to find a way to reach the people who are the front line for all of those. And yet at the same time, the academic culture tends to not focus upon continuing education for those who feel that they give education, not get it. In government, I'm from government sector. That's really my home, that's my briar patch, and I was stunned because government was in the room there out of that box. They said things like, scientists have the best jobs in the world, we travel the world, we have super jobs, we get well paid, we do interesting work, we're important to the world. Why aren't we telling kids that? Why aren't we telling them this is a better job than being a doctor or a lawyer? It's a better job even than being a stockbroker. I didn't expect to hear them say that about their jobs currently, so that was very nice. Other ideas that came out of the government sector: give every employee a bias assessment test, and then when you find out what their shortcomings are, require them to have training to mitigate it. Well, excellent. Have a diversity moment at the beginning of every meeting, just like some organizations have had to have a safety moment. So focus on diversity at the beginning of every meeting. By my count, in my time at Sandia, that would be over an hour a week, I think, if we just did 1 minute per meeting. And also, it's carrot and stick, penalize leaders who miss diversity milestones. So the government folks, they were rocking. The next day, we went to a different separation, a different cohort. the career track sessions. In the early career track, which I didn't get to attend except for the breakout, I did get excellent reports from some of my co-organizers. Surprisingly and worrisomely, harassment is still occurring in many forms, and it's incumbent upon us senior people to make sure that's just wiped out. Report and document, it's so important. Small things matter to the early career person. Do the lab coats fit the shape that you are? Are there bathrooms conveniently located for your particular gender? Is there lactation support for mothers, and so on? Things that really are very low resource levels of investment are important, especially in the early career stages. And finally, I like to hear the mutual support that early career folks were giving each other to speak up and keep speaking up. Reach out and make sure your voice is heard. Be brave, and you can do this. It was wonderful to see that level of networking and support. The mid-career, I'm told, spent a long time defining mid-career. No one really liked any of the definitions, but I liked what they settled on, which is when the protege, the mentee is a word I don't care for because it's not a word, when the protege becomes the mentor. It was recognized by the mid-career folks that to make that transition, one may need to gain some new skills and perspectives, and there isn't a lot of support for doing that. It's been a sort of learn the culture thing, and so there were some excellent suggestions made for how you make that next step. And then the other question that came up in mid-career is, okay, the glass ceilings moved to a higher level. We're talking now vice president and president level. Are the opportunities at those levels even desirable to people who are in dual careers, people who perhaps have families and kids? Are the jobs at the highest levels desirable at this point? And if not, what should we do about that? How can we change that? I thought that was an interesting question I hadn't thought of. Who doesn't want to be CEO? So finally, in the leadership track, there were some excellent questions asked. How can a diverse person get the message out to a mainstream audience? Leaders were very frustrated that any discussion of diversity among a mainstream audience always goes back to people thinking quotas, and you're trying to mess up my carefully planned workforce. There were some interesting ideas, which I'm sure will show up in the report, about how to deal with that. There was a vibrant exchange of ideas among the leadership network. A lot of these folks, as I mentioned in the industry track, hadn't talked to each other before, and I hope you'll continue this networking to learn some new ideas, some best practices. And never underestimate peer pressure. We heard from some organizations that are doing a great job in diversity. That means yours can too. Feel the pressure. It's a good thing. There were 5 sort of almost single word concepts that I heard again and again throughout all the sessions. Mentorship. And mentorship, not just in the conventional find a mentor and have that mentor help you, but mini mentors, who are people you maybe meet for lunch once and get some good advice from about a specific topic. Mentors who don't know they're being mentors, perhaps what we would call role models, people you look to as a role model for ideas who don't even know that they're giving you those ideas. Moving from mentor to mentor, mentors in particular sectors of your needs, all kinds of mentor-related issues, as well as the very important issue of how can you be a good mentor? How can we train people to actually be available, not just as the conventional mentor, but as a good mini-mentor, as a good role model, and so on. Work-life balance, including tenure clocks, flex time, maternity issues, and so on, came up again and again among everyone. The question is, how can I have the whole life I want? I have a right to have a hobby. The sense of community, the success that industry has had with employee support groups to make communities within communities. How do we foster a sense of community, of belonging, now that we've reached, in some demographic cases, a critical mass of people to be in that community? Awareness. How do we make sure people are aware of diversity issues? How do we train people who we can't always insist that they attend training? How do we keep these issues and the awareness of our leaders? And finally, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. The price of diversity is eternal vigilance. We have to keep watching, keep measuring, keep improving. And these came up in every single breakout session in one form or another. So these are my five guiding principles. Oops. The other thing that I heard throughout the summit were stories of exceptional scientists and engineers. We started with Coralie Brierly's story of growing up on the sheep ranch, and of course we heard from Viola in her inspirational story. We heard from Dr. Dresselhaus, getting to the right side of the tracks, and of course the overriding story of our summit honoree, Ellen Swallow Richards. How do we make these exceptional stories the rule for women, for minorities, for every person who wants to have this excellent scientific career? Take that home with you and ask yourself that question. Remember the stories and ask, how can we keep these stories coming? The other thing I noticed over and over and over was the network and community building. When I would go to the breakouts, when I would go to the coffee hours, at lunch, at the receptions, the level of volume was high. And I saw people interacting who, in different groups, the groups were constantly forming and breaking up and forming and breaking up. It was a huge buzz. How do we keep it buzzing? How do we keep this level of excitement and of communication going after the summit is over? Please bring that home with you as well. And finally, I'd like to just talk about the next steps. And the next steps at TMS, the outcomes at TMS, include the fact that the summit content will be captured in a document. We've had all the sessions recorded. We've had note takers. We've had our facilitators. And so all the content is kept. It's there, and it will be available in a document. The presentations will be available. Resources that have been mentioned during the summit will be posted in a central location at TMS website. My hope is that we'll bring some of the highlights, some of the things you all agree were most important and most helpful about this summit to other events such as the TMS annual meeting, to allow people who cannot attend a standalone event like this to at least sample the highlights of this event. And of course, we want to start planning the next summit and talk about other diversity axes that we can serve. If you have other ideas, you're going to get a chance to bring them on when Wayne hosts the closeout panel. And finally, the outcomes for you personally. I want to send you home with 2 demands. I know I have no right to make them, but I hope you'll take them seriously. The first is, go home and advocate with whoever you look at as your boss, your manager, your supervisor, for one of the good ideas you've heard here. Whatever one really resonated with you, whether it's starting a resource group, whether it's getting a facility of a particular type, whether you want the right fitting lab gloves. Go home and next week, when you're back at work, have a meeting with your boss and convey that to them. If we each do that, just one idea, that's over 100 good ideas, all spreading out into the network that will be copied and offer peer pressure for the rest of the community. So please do that. And the other thing I would ask you to do is follow up with one of the people you've met here in some way, whatever way that may be. It may not be a person you met for the first time here even, but someone that you had a good conversation with here. Follow up with them, drop them an email, say thanks for the conversation, or ask for a further idea or elaboration. Visit each other. But do something to continue this network that we've started to develop. So those are my requests of you. I said demands, of course they aren't, but those are my requests of you. I think if we all do that, we'll really make a big difference coming right out of the gate of this summit. So with that said, those are my comments, and I would ask you for questions, but on the plus side, what we're going to move on to is I don't know if we'd call it a panel discussion, but we're going to have 3 panelists up on stage as well as myself to talk about both what I've discussed here and any other issues, questions, ideas, comments, and anything that you want to bring up.